Hello, I'm Rabbi David Abramson, and Shavuot is coming. Shavuot is one of the major festivals of the Jewish year. It is, as our liturgy describes it, Zaman Matan Toratenu, the festival of the giving of our Torah. Shavuot commemorates the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. You know, with most of our major festivals and our minor holidays as well, we have interesting and often colorful and sometimes exotic rituals associated with those festivals. So, for example, on Sukkot, a fall harvest festival, we build a sukkah, we decorate it with fall harvest motifs, we eat our meals in the sukkah, some people sleep in their sukkot, all to commemorate the fall harvest and also to remind us of God's protection during the 40 years when we wandered in the desert after leaving Egypt. On Hanukkah, we light Hanukkah candles, we eat latkes or sufganiyot, jelly donuts, all to commemorate the miracles of the Hanukkah story, the miracle of the Maccabees' victory, the miracle of the oil burning for 8 days. On Pesach, we elaborately commemorate the Exodus from Egypt by telling the story, by eating ritual foods, by making the story come alive through our observances. And on Shavuot, we eat blintzes or cheesecake. It seems to many people that the only observance of note of Shavuot is eating dairy foods. And indeed, there is a long-standing tradition of eating dairy foods on Shavuot, but Shavuot is about so much more than that. Shavuot is a holiday which commemorates one of the most important events in our history, and yet we have so few explicit, unique observances of Shavuot. One Shavuot tradition of note is the tradition of studying Torah, and that makes sense. If Shavuot is the holiday of the giving of the Torah, then what better way to celebrate that than to study Torah? So I would like to spend some time with you studying Torah, and in particular, studying some rabbinic reflections on just what it is that occurred at Mount Sinai. It's one thing to say, well, Shavuot is the holiday of the giving of the Torah, and it's another thing to try to understand, what do we mean when we say God gave the Torah? What is it that happened at Mount Sinai? Well, we can't travel in time, literally, and go back to see what it is that happened at Mount Sinai. But we can go back there in our imaginations to explore the question of what happened at Mount Sinai, and just as importantly, what significance do those events have in our lives? So let's jump in. First, with a classical midrash that says that before God gave the Torah to Israel, before God gave the commandments to Israel, God offered the Torah to the other nations. And so the rabbis say that God first went to the descendants of Esau, our distant cousin, so to speak. Remember that Esau was Jacob's twin brother. We are the descendants of Jacob. Esau's descendants are other nations. So God first turned to the descendants of Esau and said to them, will you accept upon yourselves the Torah? And they said, well, what's written in it? And God said to them, Lo tirtzach, you shall not murder. And they said to God, this is the inheritance which our father was bequeathed, as it says in the book of Genesis, by your sword shall you live. So we obviously can't accept a group of laws that includes the prohibition of murder. So then God revealed God's self to the children of Ammon and Moab and said to them, will you accept the Torah? They said to God, well, what's written in it? So God said to them, well, for example, lo tin'af, you shall not commit adultery. And they said to God, but our origin is in adultery. This an allusion to the infamous story of Lot and his daughters. How can we accept the Torah if it includes do not commit adultery? And then God revealed God's self to the descendants of Ishmael. And God said to them, will you accept the Torah? And again, this group of people said to God, well, what's written in it? And God said, Lo tignov, you shall not steal. And this nation also said to God, we can't accept a group of laws that includes you shall not steal. So finally God came to Israel. And what did the Israelites say? Kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh v'nishma. All that God says, we will do and we will listen. And with that, God gave the Torah to Israel. Midrash number 2. Who was at Mount Sinai? Midrash number 2. Who was at Mount Sinai? Well, at first glance, the answer to that question is simple. Our ancestors. The Israelites who lived more than 3,000 years ago, the Israelites who came out from Egypt, led into freedom by Moses, brought to Mount Sinai 7 weeks later. But according to the rabbis, that generation of Israelites were not the only ones. According to the rabbis, we were at Mount Sinai because the souls of all future Israelites, the souls of all future Jews yet to be born, were at Mount Sinai as well. And we too said, Kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh v'nishma. All that God says we will do and we will listen to. I must tell you that this is one of my favorite midrashim, one of my favorite rabbinic legends, because it places me at Mount Sinai. You know, I sometimes like to joke that I'm a Jew because of an accident of birth. My parents were Jewish, and so, according to Jewish law, I'm a Jew. I inherited the mitzvot because of that accident of birth. I had nothing to say in the matter. But our ancestors were at Mount Sinai. They had the opportunity not only to be spoken to by God, but to say to God, yes, we will accept the Torah. And this midrash puts me at Mount Sinai. This midrash gives me the opportunity to stand up and say to God, yes, I will accept the Torah. The lesson of Shavuot, as seen through the lens of this midrash, of this legend, is that what occurred more than 3,000 years ago continues to occur. As we live the life of Torah, we accept Torah in our own time now, just as we stood at Mount Sinai along with our ancestors, along with the souls of all other Jews yet to be born, and accepted the Torah. Before I begin the next midrash, I want to tell you a story about a 1950 movie called The Next Voice You Hear. It starred James Whitmore and an actress named Nancy Davis, whom most of us remember as Nancy Reagan. But that's not what's most notable about this movie. Let me tell you the story of this movie. One day, people around the world are listening to their radios, and they hear a voice on the radio that says, the next voice you hear will be the voice of God. And in fact, the next voice that the people hear on the radio apparently is the voice of God. The voice of God that the people hear on the radio gives some guidance to them and then tells them to tune in on a specific day and time that will be coming up, and they will hear the voice of God again. Well, after this mysterious broadcast, people all over the world share their experience with one another, and a curious detail emerges. It seems that people who were listening to the radio in America heard the voice speaking to them in English, and people listening to the radio in France heard the voice speaking in French, and people listening to the radio in Germany heard the voice speaking to them in German. How is this possible? That people listening to the same broadcast all over the world heard the broadcast in different languages. And I thought of this movie the first time as a young adult I had the opportunity to learn the following midrash. Remember, according to the Bible's description, it wasn't only the Israelites who left Egypt together. they were accompanied by a mixed multitude, non-Israelites, other people who had been enslaved in Egypt, who took advantage of the Exodus and left enslavement, left Egypt along with the Israelites. And 7 weeks later, this mixed multitude also stood at Mount Sinai. In this midrash, Rabbi Yochanan tells us that God's voice was split into 70 voices in 70 languages so that all the nations could understand. The different people who comprised this mixed multitude heard the revelation at Mount Sinai, heard God's voice in different languages, each in their own languages, and the members of the mixed multitude heard God's voice, each in his or her own language, just like in that movie. But the Midrash includes details that the movie did not include. The revelation at Mount Sinai, God revealing God's self to human beings, was an overwhelming experience for the mixed multitudes. And so after each of them heard God's voice, each in a different language, their souls departed. They died. But the Israelites who heard the voice were not heard. But then the rabbis go on. Come and see how the voice went forth, they say, coming to each Israelite with a force proportioned to his or her own individual strength. The old, according to their strength. To the young, according to theirs. To the children, to the babies, to the men and the women, each according to their own strength. And even to Moses according to his own strength. That is a voice that each of them could endure. Two lessons from this wonderful midrash. Number one, God spoke simultaneously in different languages to different people. And even the Israelites, who presumably all spoke the same language, even they heard the revelation in different ways. Children heard it in one way. Adults heard it in another way. Perhaps sophisticated people heard it in one way, and more simple people heard it in a different way. And there's an important lesson for us, all these thousands of years after Mount Sinai, and that is the Torah can and the Torah does speak to each of us differently. Each of us can hear Torah in our own unique way. Each of us can respond to Torah in our own unique way. And all of this comes from this wonderful midrash of the mysterious events at Mount Sinai. And the final midrash describes the moments just before God gave the commandments. In the moment just before God gave the commandments, say the rabbis, no bird twittered, no fowl flew, no ox lowed. The normal sounds of beasts of burden, all of those were silenced. But the silence was not only here on earth. The rabbis go on to say, none of the ophanim, the flying angels, stirred a wing. The seraphim, the fiery angels, did not say, Kadosh, Kadosh, holy, holy. What's that all about? Well, remember in the 6th chapter of the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah describes the seraphim, the fiery angels, praising God by saying, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, holy, holy, holy is Adonai Tzevaot, the Lord of hosts, Malochol haaretz kevodo. The world is filled with God's glory. And that beautiful statement of the angels we recite during a prayer known as the Kedusha, when we sanctify God's name by praising God with the words of the angels. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. And yet, according to this midrash, even the angels up in heaven were silenced. The whole world, the rabbis say, was hushed into breathless silence, and the voice went forth, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am Adonai, your God. What an amazing midrash. It tries to capture the utter mystery of Mount Sinai. Imagine a world in complete silence. All the normal sounds of nature silenced. Even the sounds of the angels praising God silenced. The entire world, no beyond that. The entire universe, no beyond that. All of creation is silenced. And then from that silence comes the voice of God. What a mystery revelation was. What a significant event was the revelation at Mount Sinai. I have a footnote, or what I believe to be a footnote to this midrash, from the pen of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the most significant Jewish thinkers and Jewish teachers of the 20th century. And Rabbi Heschel writes the following: "The Bible has shattered man's illusion of being alone. Sinai broke the cosmic silence that thickens our blood with despair." Imagine a world in which God is silent. Imagine a world in which God does not say, "Your lives are important to me. The way you live your lives is so important to me that I'm giving you this blueprint for your lives." Can you imagine a world in which God is silent? A world in which God does not say, "Love your neighbor as yourself." A world in which God does not say, "Anochi Adonai Elohecha," I am Adonai your God. A world in which God does not say, "Keep Shabbos, observe Pesach, observe Shavuot, keep kosher, learn Torah, love your neighbor, help the needy, take responsibility for your fellow human beings." We are blessed by Torah. We are blessed by receiving God's commandments. And so a world in which God is silent thickens our blood with despair, writes Rabbi Heschel. I've often wondered how Rabbi Heschel was influenced by this midrash. In the midrash itself, the silence of the cosmos is a wonderful thing. The world is silent. The entire cosmos is silent. And from that wonderful silence comes the voice of God, comes Torah. But in Heschel's formulation, that silence isn't so wonderful. A silent universe, a world in which God's voice is not heard, thickens our blood with despair. That's not a wonderful silence. That's a terrible silence. But the good news is that silence was broken. That silence was broken by the voice of a God who did say, "Your lives are important to me, and how you live your lives is important to me. And here is the Torah. Here is the blueprint for your lives. Follow this way of life. Follow these commandments. Follow these rules. Let your lives be influenced by the values that emanate from Torah, and your lives will be better." That's the challenge of Torah. That's the challenge of Shavuot. To hear God's voice, to feel God's concern, and ultimately to respond to that voice by committing on this Shavuot and throughout the year, committing more and more to learning Torah and to living the life of Torah. And so Shavuot, which at first glance appears to be only about blintzes and cheesecake, is about a lot more than that. Shavuot is our opportunity to ponder the mystery of what happened at Mount Sinai all of those thousands of years ago, and to contemplate the place of Torah in our lives. Chag Sameach. Have a meaningful and an enjoyable Shavuot.